Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and it's time to take a look at some of the most exciting strategy games slated to release later this year. As always, this video focuses on strategy games of all kinds, including subgenres such as 4X, turn-based tactics, RTS, GSG, etc., etc. But if you're looking for simulation, management, and city-building games, like the hotly anticipated Manor Lords, you'll find those listed in my other video I'll link in the pinned comment below, as well as on screen at the end of this video. There are a ton of games to get through, so feel free to use the timestamps below to jump around if you'd like, and if you find something you like the look of here, make sure you go wishlist the game on Steam, as it's a great way to support indie devs especially. Between how visibility works on Steam and how much of a motivator it is, I'm sure it makes a huge difference. And hey, if you find something you like, consider liking the video, and maybe subscribing to the channel to stay up to date with more games in the genre. Quick disclaimer before we begin, I am affiliated with Hooded Horse, the publisher behind many of the games included in this video. While they have zero influence on what I include in my videos and on my channel, I wanted to mention this upfront in the interest of transparency, and it's probably also worth pointing out that the reason why I work with them on various things in the first place is because they were gearing up to publish many of my most anticipated games, so the inclusion of many of their titles here shouldn't come as a surprise. More details on that relationship can be found in the video linked in the description below, but with all that said, and with no more time to waste on an intro, let's begin. Dominion 6 is set to release on the 17th of January, and the Dominion's games have always been equal parts exciting and intimidating for me. This might finally be my opportunity to dive in with both feet. A turn-based 4X strategy game that you can play against the AI or in multiplayer, pitting the players against each other or having them join forces against the AI with simultaneous turns. Playing as a powerful being that aspires to godhood, you lead a nation with unique features determined by the kind of god you intend to be and the kind of people you're leading. These nations and godly powers are inspired by real-world mythologies from the world over, which I always find compelling. The Dominion's games have always been extremely complex in all the right ways, featuring great asymmetric design, extremely detailed unit stats, a huge variety of abilities at your disposal, alongside hundreds of spells to support your plans. The learning curve is often described as a sheer cliff, but the potential for stories here seems endless, and I will climb the highest mountain to experience that, so I am very excited to potentially finally dedicate some time to a Dominions game. Outpost Infinity Siege is slated for release February of this year, and it definitely feels like an outlier in an otherwise fairly traditional list of what you'd expect from the strategy genres. The game features base building and tower defense, which is why it's here, but it's also built around FPS mechanics, and I'm always excited to see games that try to bridge the gap, maybe because of how much Battlezone I played as a kid. The game has you exploring the world and gathering resources to build up your outpost and its defenses, giving you access to a huge variety of weapon types, ammo, and customization options that range from homing missiles to grenades to solid projectiles, and then it asks you to work with said defenses either alone or in co-op against an AI army of machines. Take direct control of turrets and missile launchers, order them to provide support with indirect fire, and hop into giant mechs as you, if I've interpreted the trailer correctly, play through multiple runs in perhaps a somewhat roguelike way. The game looks super high octane with great visuals and great ideas, and I can't wait to check it out. Terminator Dark Fate Defiance is scheduled for a February 21st release date after a Next Fest demo at the end of last year, and I'm looking forward to seeing how things have come along since then. I'm a fan of the original Terminator movies, and though this game is set in the new alternate timeline of said universe, I've always wanted an RTS or real-time tactics game set during the war between humans and machines, and I will gladly take what I can get. But my excitement here isn't just about the IP. The game looks to be doing some genuinely interesting things and not just resting on the fact that it's a Terminator game. The narrative single-player campaign has you lead the remnants of the US Army against the forces of the AI Legion, while the skirmish and multiplayer modes allow you to play as either side plus a third known as the Resistance. Each has a decent variety of unit types for you to control, from infantry to armor to air, and what's more, each unit is quite complex. They all carry different types of weapons best used for different kinds of situations against different kinds of enemies. They've got various abilities that reflect their equipment, like being able to toss smoke or frag grenades, and in the case of vehicles, they've also got damage models that track not just the status of the vehicle and the impact of, say, a damaged set of tracks or what have you, but also dead crew. If you open the hatch on a vehicle, for example, your gunner up top is more likely to die, so you can opt to close the hatch and keep them safe, which is not something I've seen before, I don't think. There are plenty of compelling systems to build on top of, especially when your single-player experience will involve carrying the same units over from mission to mission. There are some really solid ideas here that could really help Terminator Dark Fate Defiance shine. I can't wait to see what the devs have cooked up. King Arthur Legion 9 is slated for release in Q1 of 2024, and as a fan of the dark and twisted predecessor, King Arthur Knight's Tale, I'm really looking forward to this follow-up title. As with the previous one, this RPG with isometric exploration, turn-based tactical combat, and base management once again has you play as what one would assume to be the antagonist of the story, the undead Roman tribune Gaius Julius Mento, raised alongside a demonic legion thanks to the good graces of the dead Emperor Septimus Sulla. You will try to find, protect, and rebuild the remains of Nova Roma on Avalon as you lead your heroes against the Picts and fend off nightmarish creatures, Fomorians, and Sidhe alike. Unique skills across 6 unique characters will make each interesting to bring to battle, and I suspect there might be similar mechanics to the previous game where you'd manage lower-tier recruits and train them up for combat, handing out roles as you manage your heroes, and taking on the difficult decisions that'll ultimately determine the fate of Avalon, Nova Roma, and Gaius Julius Mento's humanity or descent into demonhood. I'm really excited to see what the devs have cooked up for this one. Homeworld 3 is slated for release on the 8th of March after a few years of waiting and a more than strange start to the development process with a now defunct Fig page. As a huge fan of the original games, I've been eagerly awaiting a sequel for years, and though Deserts of Kharak was a Homeworld game, the return to space is a very welcome one. Homeworld 3 is an RTS taking place in 3D space, skipping past base building mechanics and instead focusing on fleet building. You'll still need to mine and gather resources, but all in the interest of strengthening your fleet across a few different classes of ships. Everything we've seen so far, from the visual style to the audio work to the ship designs, are all absolutely spot on for a Homeworld game, capturing the same feel as before. And it looks like we're getting some interesting game modes beyond the narrative campaign, introducing a co-op mode with roguelike elements, and of course, the return of online PvP. We're also going to see some solid innovations as far as space combat in the Homeworld games is concerned, introducing line-of-sight considerations and cover-based combat in space as you order your ships to tuck away under asteroids and among the debris of massive ships and station wrecks. I'm really excited to get my hands on Homeworld 3. The series has always been one of my favorites, and I can't wait to see the story continue beyond the events of Homeworld 2. Bring on the iconic ship designs, the beautiful OST, and the radio chatter that just always hits the spot. Homeworld 3 is looking like the game I've been waiting for all these years. MENACE is slated for release sometime in 2024, and as a huge fan of Battle Brothers, I'm really excited to see what the devs are planning for their follow-up game. A sci-fi turn-based tactics game with a lot of similar elements pulled forward, including a heavy character focus and the promise of a challenging difficulty curve with interesting progression for your ever-growing band of soldiers to include not just the Marines that you start with, but out of desperation, the collection of local miscreants you must recruit from the star system where the game is set. The Wayback system has been cut off from the core worlds, and it's fallen into a bit of chaos as various local factions stake their claims, all while a mysterious threat is slowly growing behind the scenes. You arrive to bring order back to the system, managing relationships with these various factions to gain access to additional resources, equipment, ship upgrades, and abilities, and as you do so, the relationships between your team's leaders will evolve too. These characters each have their own backstories, and only a small group of them out of a big pool will be available to recruit in any given campaign, meaning each playthrough will include different characters with different upgrade trees and storylines and relationships too. Some lead groups of infantry, others come in vehicles or walkers, and each has their place on the massive battlefields where the devs are introducing a larger scale of combat alongside innovations to core concepts like suppression and how weapons calculate optimal range and damage over distance to influence your approach to combat beyond just the binary of a target either being in or out of range. What's more, rather than simply flipping between a strategic layer where you manage your ship and crew and the battle layer where you engage with all sorts of different enemies, human and otherwise, there's an intermediate layer being introduced here too. As you go from planet to planet, pursuing various missions, you'll be presented with procedurally generated multi-stage operations on branching paths. Each stage of an operation represents a tactical battle within that mission, but the paths you decide to pursue will change how future engagements for the same mission might play out, cutting off enemy access to reinforcements, applying debuffs, providing you with buffs, so on and so forth. There are a lot of cool ideas in MENACE, and I go over them in my deep dive video that I've linked in the description below. Check it out for more details, But either way, MENACE has definitely got me very excited. Breachway is slated for release sometime in 2024, and I've been looking forward to this sci-fi roguelike deck builder for a while now. Set in the far, far future, you're put in charge of a crew and a ship, choosing between a handful of different chassis, and going off into the system full of branching paths, turn-based card-based battles, stations where you can purchase new equipment, and random events and opportunities for much more. Depending on the kind of equipment you've strapped onto your ship, you'll have access to different sets of attack, defense, and utility cards, and their associated upgrades, with different kinds of synergies to explore alongside 3 different kinds of resources generated per turn in combat, needed to actually use or bolster your various cards. Balancing which of these resources you're focusing on is determined by what kind of loadout you're rocking, and which of the multitude of enemy ships you're up against will also influence your decision making, as some will focus on using shields, while others will lack such modules, and some will prefer missiles over lasers or flak cannons, encouraging the use of countermeasures, so on and so forth, potentially influencing the path you carve through the map as you try to engage with or avoid the various factions based on their likely armaments and their attitude towards you, something you'll be able to actually influence through the decisions you make during a run. A cool, high-octane visual style, a great deal of personality, and promising depth, including as well as beyond the deck building, all has me very interested. Broken Roads recently announced a delay into early 2024 after having been in development since 2019, but you can play the demo right now if you'd like to experience this intriguing post-apocalyptic isometric RPG with turn-based tactical combat all set in Australia. I find myself very drawn in by the game's atmosphere and sense of place. From the narration, to the art style, to the names of character classes, to how they're described, everything feels exceptionally unique, and I can't help but feel how I did when I first played Fallout 1 or Disco Elysium when I see this game in action. It's doing something very different here that permeates through all aspects of the game. Take, for instance, the morality system. Rather than a black and white good versus evil kind of setup, here you have 4 quadrants of a circle ranging from humanist, utilitarian, Machiavellian, and nihilist, representing you as somebody who thinks broadly, everybody matters, the collective good matters, your own group matters above all else, or finally, only you matter. Decisions you make in conversation will shift your moral compass, and depending on if you double down on one or spread your decisions across the different categories, you'll gain access to narrower categories of higher level options or broader categories of lower level options in terms of skills and decisions you can make. Take also the option to have a punt, a system that allows your character to try and accomplish something even if they don't actually have the skill for it, introducing a bit of fluidity to character creation. I could talk at length about why Broken Road stands out to me, but between what I've described so far, what you can see on screen, and the fact that you can check the demo out right now yourself if you'd like, I think it's clear why I'm excited to get my hands on Broken Roads. Broken Arrow is slated for release in 2024, and this is a game I've been ridiculously excited for since it was first announced, and after having played the demo last year, I'm doubling down on that excitement. I'm a huge fan of Eugen's Wargame series, so I'm very pleased to see more developers try to execute on the same idea and scale of combat, showcasing the destructive force of modern warfare and the intricacies of intertwining systems that any fighting force has to take into consideration. Visually, the game's looking great, and it's got some very interesting ideas to help it stand out as it pits the US against Russia in all-out war. For one, the level of customization here is beyond anything I've seen in similar games, allowing you to go in and choose weapons packages, armor preferences, and special equipment, be it for infantry, armor, or air. Each of the 300 units is rendered in a ridiculous level of detail that you can zoom into as you command your forces, and the narrative experience that I got to have during last year's demo was great. It felt like how a classic RTS splits a mission up into chapters, but at this scale, with the context of modern warfare, it just felt so engaging as you get thrust into fairly believable modern tactics and strategies, and I can't wait to see more of it in action. You'll be flying in armored support, you'll manage the flying height of your choppers to keep them safe from enemy anti-air, you'll send infantry charging into buildings or otherwise securing cover, and you'll fire artillery from halfway across the map to take down structures, suppress enemy units, or provide smoke screens for well-timed advances. Apply all these moving parts and more across a huge army at your disposal at a massive urban scale on any given mission, and Broken Arrow is looking like an absolute joy to play. Plus, with a scenario editor that allows for scripting cutscenes and dialogue, we might see some amazing user-generated content on top of what the devs themselves are making. I am Really looking forward to this one. Espiocracy is slated for release in 2024, and you may have heard me gush over this game in the past. I'm a sucker for espionage, I love GSGs, and with Espiocracy, we're getting the best of both worlds as you take charge of your own intelligence community, managing its various arms, its budget and resources, its operatives, its activities, and its agenda, all in service of your nation. I've been meaning to do a deep dive video on the channel on Espiocracy for a while, since there's just so much to talk about. Starting shortly after the end of World War II, you can play as one of 74 nations, including some of which are still fighting for their independence. Operating from the shadows, you'll be able to influence your chosen nation's policies, guiding your head of state to your benefit, while simultaneously influencing the political situations in foreign nations as well. Recruit influential actors such as celebrities, inventors, and authors, major organizations like political parties and trade unions, or even entire sectors like a nation's military or media to accomplish a variety of goals in domestic and foreign matters, with each of your pawns having a different level of influence and competence for you to worry about. Concern yourself with the traits and attributes of the various people under your employ. Will they turn coat on an assignment? Will they leak government secrets? How will you deal with and influence international organizations like the UN to your benefit? With 34 different kinds of operations ranging from installing wiretaps to performing assassinations, you're operating, again, in a world of shadows, coups, turncoats, and endless secrets. What's no secret is just how excited I am for this game. I cannot wait to show it off on the channel, so keep your eyes peeled for my deep dive video finally, hopefully releasing this year. And it'll take some time because there's just so much to be excited about and to discuss. Espiocracy is looking absolutely amazing. Stormgate is looking like it's going to take the world by storm. It's listed as coming soon on Steam, but after a closed beta in December, the game looks poised to release sometime in the summer of 2024. Made by the people who were involved in the development of Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2, you know there's going to be a great deal of care when it comes to everything from the narrative campaign, to the distinct feeling between the three factions, to the technical execution of crucial things like the responsiveness of units, pathfinding, balance, so on and so forth. There's a single-player narrative campaign, a special co-op game mode, and of course, a competitive 1v1 ladder, as well as a 3v3 mode. The engine can supposedly support over 1,000 units at a time on screen, which is impressive for an RTS like this, and I'm curious to see how that influences the design of the game. While multiplayer games might never reach those numbers, it's something that would make for some rather epic single-player moments. Modding is also being baked into development, with a map editor in particular being a welcome addition with games like this. If you're into the classic RTS formula, it looks like Stormgate might be the game we've been waiting for. Men of War 2 is set to release sometime in 2024 after being delayed out of a late 2023 release, for good reasons. Apart from the original delay that resulted from the studio needing to relocate, the game was showing some really interesting and promising mechanics last year, but it still needed some ironing out, so this delay is very promising. I'm excited for Men of War 2. It's a World War II RTS with 5 single-player campaigns mixing narrative and history, as well as multiplayer gameplay featuring destructible environments across over 20 maps that allow you to explore all manner of military tactics with complex details for each of the units, including intricate damage models, equipment type, and abilities. I played a bit of the game during its beta last year and had a lot of fun with it, despite the room for improvement, so I'm really excited to see where the devs take the game. The 3 narrative campaigns have particularly piqued my interest as you play the Americans in one, the Soviets in another, and the Germans in the third, with the German campaign actually featuring constant retreat and loss, an interesting angle for the player to take on in an RTS. I like the idea, and can't wait to take it for a spin. Operation Overlord and Operation Bagration are 2 additional historical campaigns, and then there are 2 additional single-player gameplay modes too. Raids involves facing 16 back-to-back randomly generated battles, and Conquest offers a dynamic campaign where the player tries to conquer a campaign map, engaging in battles in whatever order they see fit, as the AI tries to counterattack and push the player back. That mode has me particularly intrigued, as it can give the game life beyond its single-player campaign alongside, of course, the multiplayer scene and the mod support. Mars Tactics is slated for release sometime this year, and you've definitely heard me recommend this one before. I'm a big fan of the core theme here, and seeing some of the innovative ideas the game has planned for both its turn-based tactics layer and its strategic layer, it's hard not to get excited. Pitting the forces of labor against those of capital in a war for the Red Planet, Mars Tactics features unique mechanics for either side of the war as you research technologies, build up your bases, and plan operations across a grid-based strategic map that's divided into subsectors. You'll arm and train your troops up, watching them improve their capabilities based on actions they perform on the battlefield, and you'll keep a track of their traits, personalities, and histories as you send them to fight from grid to grid, avoiding dangerous enemy patrols, setting up ambushes, and placing groups across grid squares within a sector to ensure they're able to support each other with off-map abilities and as reinforcements in combat too. The way the two layers intertwine is really interesting here, as the placement of troops is particularly important, and so too is the acquisition of supplies, the protection of related supply chains, and the acquisition of equipment too, like dropships that can help you more quickly move troops around. In combat, the environment is totally destructible. Not just the buildings, but the ground itself can be ripped up with explosives to help provide cover where there wasn't any before. And beyond that, there are some pretty unique ballistics models and ideas around how combat in turn-based tactics games can be improved. Lean out from behind cover, scramble away from grenades tossed your way, and work collaboratively between your teammates as you trade action points between them or as you toss unprimed grenades and clips to friends so they can use them to throw further or to reload or much more besides. There's ideas on display here that I'm shocked I've never seen before, and I can't wait to get my hands on Mars Tactics. Hexxen Hunters should be releasing sometime in 2024 after being revealed at Gamescom last year, and I'm a huge fan of RPGs centered around the idea of hunting monsters, where the player characters need to do proper research and preparation before taking on their targets. The game is set in the Hexxen 1773 universe, a tabletop RPG system set in an alternate history Germany where a gate to hell opened somewhere in the Black Forest. You play as a band of heroes fighting against a great conspiracy that threatens humanity, and this pits you against all manner of demons, monsters, and the cults that worship them. In some cases, you might find yourself leveraging a relationship with one cult to help overcome another. But whether friend or foe, each has their own fighting style, requiring you to adapt your own approach accordingly. The hero characters all have their own special abilities and unique skill sets. While some are powered by their rage to inflict maximum damage in melee, others rely on magic or alchemical concoctions to overcome the enemy. But as you engage in the real-time isometric exploration and the turn-based tactical battles, you'll also manage and upgrade the hamlet from which your intrepid group sets out. Anybody who isn't going out on any given mission will stay back and either rest and heal or provide support remotely. Prayers at the local church, smithing and crafting, getting intel from the locals, or otherwise bolstering current and future capabilities. And what's more, the folks you're sending out on missions will engage in an interesting approach to procedural generation. Even when taking on main story missions, the actual mission maps will be procedurally generated, meaning multiple playthroughs will truly be unique through and through. On top of all that, the turn-based tactical combat is free from the restraints of a grid, so we've got some fresh ideas on that front too. There are some cool ideas across the board here, paired with a gorgeous visual style. This is one to keep an eye on. Capes is slated to release sometime in 2024, and I'm really hoping for a good superhero-themed turn-based tactics game out of this one. It looks suitably characterful and packed with personality, as you're in charge of a band of superheroes needing to recruit, train, and lead your team in combat against supervillains that have had the city under their thumb for the last 20 years when the game picks up. Play through a narrative campaign with a combination of main story missions and side missions alike, as you choose up to 4 heroes to take on to any given mission, looking for synergies between their varied superpower archetypes ranging, based on what I can tell, from telekinesis to super speed and super strength and more. I'm excited to get my hands on this one to really put it through its paces, but for the time being, it looks like quite a stylish game with some very fun ideas and infinite possibilities. Millenia is simply listed as coming soon, though 2024 has been suggested as its target release date in a few places. I had a chance to play quite a bit of this game in a very early alpha state already, and it has some very innovative ideas when it comes to Civ-style 4X games that have me extremely intrigued. I'm sure we'll see much more about Millenia over the course of this year, but what has me most interested is how it deals with the transition through the ages, splitting technologies up between the different ages and providing branching paths for the ages, determining how humanity progresses through very real historical ones like the Bronze Age and the Industrial Revolution, but also through seemingly science fiction ones like the steampunk-inspired Age of Ether or the Age of Utopia and more. You'll be building cities, recruiting units, going to war, participating in diplomacy, and engaging with a whole slew of other gameplay elements one can expect from the genre, but this approach to the tech tree where each age gives access to specific technologies which in turn give access to specific units, buildings, improvements, etc., I find this absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to see how Millenia doubles down on this unique aspect and applies it across other parts of gameplay. Make sure you check out my deep dive video highlighting what makes Millenia stand out from the crowd. This one's well worth keeping an eye on. Era History Untold is another Civ-like game slated for release sometime in 2024, and I'm really curious about some of the differentiators here in a game that starts in the Stone Age and goes all the way to the near future across 3 acts. We've got key features of the genre reflected here, of course, with resources at various levels, cities that need establishing, construction that can be done within them to improve their output, unit recruitment, etc., etc. And we also see ideas clearly inspired by the giants upon whose shoulders Era History Untold will stand. Paragons are great people that will come through from time to time and that can be assigned different roles for different benefits, for example, or quests that give you sub-objectives and rewards outside of the win conditions that you'll typically be chasing. But there are things that'll make Era stand out in some pretty significant ways. Using a 3-act structure, broken down into historical eras, will mean the world will sort of progress in unison, which sounds like it'll prevent the classic issue of tanks against swordsmen. Also, it's been suggested that the game will work almost like a battle royale, where each act will slowly reduce the number of civilizations on the map, creating for tenser and tenser situations as time goes on. There are simultaneous turns here where orders are given at the same time and resolved across the board based on things like unit speed. Unit movement and tile improvements seem to be both inter- and intra-region, rather than using hexes or grids. There's a tech tree that uses a deck-based system, similar perhaps to Old World's more believable randomized approach, at least at a glance, and there are different sets of stats being tracked for cities in the norm here. Happiness, sure. Then we've got health, prosperity, education, and aesthetics. These can each be seen in the city detail screen alongside religious breakdowns and the city's heritage too. What implications all these have are yet to be seen, though we've also seen the ability to assign or use items on cities to bolster them in one way or another as well. Books to increase education, feasts and jewelry to increase immigration and population respectively, so on and so forth. Beyond all that, there's just a level of visual detail and fidelity that we've not seen in 4X games like this before. Individual citizens walking around, animals grazing, proper distribution of roads and paths and the structures and fields in between them, and more such things that just bring the world to life. There are a lot of interesting moving parts here, and there are a ton more that I could touch on, but suffice it to say that Era History Untold has some very, very intriguing ideas up its sleeve. I cannot wait to check it out. Rune Coliseum has a to-be-announced release date, but I'm hopeful we'll see the game release in at least early access in 2024. Either way, this one has really piqued my curiosity, and I couldn't help myself. I had to showcase it here today. You play as a gladiator in this roguelike deck-building game with a WeGo turn-based system. Not something I've seen in deck-building games, I don't think, at least off the top of my head. You choose a character from a roster of around 7, each with unique traits, skills, and physical attributes. Then you assign them equipment with a variety to either purchase or loot from off the battlefield, each providing additional unique skills, allowing you to pick and choose to match your playstyle. Then, craft and merge runes that provide you with additional abilities, and then go from fight to fight, facing off against the other gladiators who will level up alongside you unless eliminated early, and then you just try to become the champion of the Coliseum. Battling looks very interesting here though, as you queue up a bunch of your skills, taking a look at what the enemy is planning and counter-planning accordingly, and then both sides execute their queued moves simultaneously. I'm really curious to see the kinds of combinations this introduces and how counters and combos work in a system like this, and seeing how much magic and over-the-top supernatural stuff seems to be included here as well, I feel like there's a lot more than meets the eye here. This one's really interesting. I'll be keeping an eye on this one for sure. DORF Real-Time Strategic Conflict also has a to-be-announced release date, and I'm really excited for what looks like a true harkening back to the classic RTSs like Command & Conquer and Red Alert, including art style and UI elements too. Don't worry though, gameplay here seems to be a blend of the old and the new, introducing relatively newer RTS concepts like the ability to rotate buildings or the ability to engage in close quarters combat within garrison buildings, including buildings that allow you to produce enemy units once captured. And we've also seen the ability to combine units in interesting ways, like mounting artillery onto transport vehicles to make mobile artillery. So it's not like DORF RTS is purely relying on nostalgia here. It's got some innovative ideas of its own too. One of the standout features that I've seen so far is the increased focus on resources than the norm. Refining resources to get more out of them introduces the concept of supply chain and production chain management, whereas most classic RTS titles simply had you acquire resources into a global pool to convert into units, buildings, and tech at will. This brings huge implications to base building and introduces some factory game elements too, perhaps. The 3 single-player campaigns explore 3 distinct asymmetrically designed factions, and there's naturally plans for a skirmish mode and multiplayer options too. I'm excited to see this blend of classic and modern, and can't wait to learn more about this one. Age of History 3 only recently got shown in an alpha state a handful of days ago after being announced in November of 2023, and I am very excited for this one. It looks like a competitor for Europa Universalis, and as a big fan of that series, I welcome competitors in the space since that's usually a win for the consumer, and that's us. I'm seeing a world map with a great attention to detail, featuring countries subdivided into regions and further into provinces, and the gameplay footage shown so far shows how each province has its own information panels featuring familiar elements such as population, devastation, trade goods, fort levels, constructed buildings, so on and so forth. We also see how provinces need to be cored, we see how budget management works, how tax efficiency, and, well, a lot of systems that are very similar to Europa Universalis are present here. But we also see some things approached in a completely different way. The tech tree is a lot more like a classic tech tree, for example, with branches and linear progression. And as we can see through the units panel, technology goes all the way from the early 1400s to fighter jets. There's the idea of civilization legacies, similar to Crusader Kings 3's Dynasty legacies, and battles will look somewhat familiar to EU4 fans as well. And while there are definitely a lot of parallels to existing GSGs out there, I'm really intrigued not just by the fact that we have an additional competitor and what else it'll do differently, but also by just how far the tech tree goes. From horsemen and slingers to tanks and howitzers and fighter jets, I love that in my Civ-like 4X games and in my Empire Earth-style RTS games, but how does that look all in one GSG? I never played Age of History 2, but it's quite well reviewed, and between that and everything I've seen in the alpha gameplay video so far, I am very, very interested. It's going to be a great year for strategy games, folks. If you found something here you liked, again, don't hesitate to go wishlist it on Steam, and maybe hit the like button here on the video too. If you're looking for more exciting games releasing later this year, check out the video I've linked on screen right now, and don't hesitate to subscribe to stay up to date with reviews, previews, and more. Otherwise, as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly, and of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time. Cheers.